Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits. The rebels. The troublemakers. The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Thomas Zweifel. I am the author of 6 leadership books with dramatic titles like Communicate or Die and Culture Clash. And I'm also the founder of Global Leader Academy, where we teach you to make the human component, move it from something messy and chaotic and unpredictable to something that is systematic and predictable. And today I have the great pleasure to cover 3 things with you on this video. Number 1, I will show you the leadership model that has been around for the last 500 years. And I will show you, number 2, why this leadership model is bankrupt today, why the world has fundamentally changed, and therefore how the leadership landscape has changed. And number 3, what do you need to know about being a leader in this new landscape today? So have you had these challenges? I'll just give you a few examples. Have you had the challenge of feeling like you're in a sandwich position between your superiors, your bosses, and on the other hand, your subordinates, your teams, your troops, and you felt like determined by circumstances or by demands of bosses or demands of colleagues, where you felt like your life is not really your own, where you felt like the email onslaught and the scheduling onslaught of appointments is just getting the better of you, and you just don't feel like you got the power, or you're no longer in charge of your life. Have you had those challenges of building alignment in your team and not knowing how to mobilize people for your vision and strategy, where you feel like you got pushback from them? So if you had any of these challenges, I would say that you're in the right place, because I've been there. I've had these challenges. You know, I've been in places where I literally didn't know what to do. I felt like you know, my leadership came to a standstill, and I have to admit, just to be personal for a moment, I find it a pain in the neck to work with people most of the time. Okay, they're a pain in the neck. If I could push a button on my computer and basically with a mouse click get my results, I would very gladly do that. But unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, we have to work with other human beings. We have to mobilize people. We have to get alignment with people. We have to reach consensus, especially if you're a leader. You have to work through other people to get results. That's what leadership is. So welcome to the club. And I'm happy to tell you that I've had clients who have dealt with these challenges, who also found it really difficult to work with other people, but they've used my tools, for example, the pyramid, which I'm about to show you, and they have generated tremendous results with those challenges. I'll give you one example. At a global bank in Switzerland, I once had a client who was a senior manager who felt really in this sandwich position between his bosses, who were pushing for results from above and giving mixed signals about the strategy, and the 5,000 knowledge workers that he had to outsource to other countries. That was a major, major strategic challenge. And he and I worked together, and we brought his team together. We created a strategy, we created alignment, created a shared vision, and we then went into 100-day catalytic projects where teams worked to produce breakthrough results. And I'm very happy to report that not only did the company produce a $200 million cost savings out of this work together, but also my client became the CIO for Switzerland, which is really great. So he's on his way to the top. And if I have any say in the matter, he will be at the very top in a very short time. So those are the results that people have caused. Now let's talk about what the existing model of leadership is. I want to just show you that the leadership model that we have inherited, that we're still using, I would say unconsciously and automatically, really comes from a gentleman whose name is Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay, nice Italian name. And Machiavelli, in the 15th century, so this was over 500 years ago, counseled leaders of his time, and those were mostly princes or kings or hereditary monarchs. He was coaching them on how to be credible leaders. And the model that he used was really, you have to be top down, you have to be very, very strict, and you sometimes even have to be cruel, because we're not living in a perfect world where people can be virtuous. It would be nice to be virtuous, but unfortunately we live in a world where people have to be tough sometimes and ruthless and sometimes even unethical. And that leadership model has been around for over 500 years. But the world has changed. We're living in a completely different world, and therefore the leadership landscape is also very different. So what has changed? Just a few examples. Number one, we're now living in a world that is dominated by the media. We have Facebook, we have YouTube. And just to give you one example, if Winston Churchill, who was one of the great leaders of the 20th century, would be around today, he would be known not for his great speeches, but basically for his battle with the bottle. Because I think we all know that Churchill wrote most of his speeches on champagne. So he was kind of high most of the time, which might be a great leadership tool. But you know, maybe not the principal tool that you want to use. So Churchill would be all over the media. If you take John F. Kennedy, would be in the media for his affairs with prostitutes while his wife was leaving the White House. FDR, Roosevelt, would be on YouTube for his illness, which he was able to hide because the media were not as dominant at the time. That's the first change. So we're in a kind of a public fishbowl. That leadership takes place. Second change, there's democratization, which means not only politically. 100 years ago there were maybe a dozen democracies in the world. Now we have over 100 democracies in the world. This also happens in companies where the hierarchical levels are really flattening, and people have now to be collaborative much more. It even happens in the U.S. Army. You know, I had the privilege of working with the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, with the U.S. Air Force Academy, and it's very clear that now even the U.S. Army has to adopt a coaching approach, because the soldier in Sadr City or Baghdad knows probably as much as the general or the people in the Pentagon about the strategy. So they really have to integrate the strategy and listen to the people on the front lines. This also happens in companies, you know, where the customer is now becoming much more dominant, much less credulous. So you actually have to develop products with the customer together. And you know, if I just take the example of doctors, my parents would still blindly trust their doctor and say, well, you know, he's the doctor, so he knows the truth. He's kind of a demigod. Nowadays, you go to WebMD or you go to Google and you get a second opinion. You just don't trust the doctor the same way, or you call for your rights. So that's the second change. So what does this mean? You have to be somebody who communicates in a very different way. I was recently talking to a CEO, and I reminded him of the importance of two-way communication. And he grew kind of adamant with me. He was irritated. And he said, of course I do two-way communication. I write to my people and I talk to my people. So this CEO, unfortunately, did not get the real understanding of the other side of communication, which is really listening. So today, if you're working in a corporate hierarchy and each level of the hierarchy reports 50% to the next level of the hierarchy, and let's assume you have 7 levels, do you know how many percent does the CEO know? You might be thinking right now, if you're a quantitative type, you know the answer. It's 1.6%. So if the CEO has only 1.6% of the available knowledge, of the available information for that company that's relevant for decision making, you can only hope and pray, fingers crossed, that you will make the right decisions based on those 1.6% and not based on the 98.4% that might be the wrong knowledge to know. So what does that mean? You can not only communicate down, you also have to communicate up, which means you have to listen. So that's the third big change. And the fourth big change is globalization. We now live in a world where you have to work with software developers in Hyderabad in India. You might have to use outsourcing companies in Chile. You have to work in virtual teams around the world. And when Churchill was around, he could still say about Mahatma Gandhi, that little naked man. So he could make those disparaging comments. Nowadays, you can't do that anymore. You have to be appropriate to other cultures, which means you have to stand in the shoes of the other side, whether the other side is a software developer in Hyderabad or whether the other side is even Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So even if you want to fight against somebody from another mindset, you have to get into their mindset, stand in their shoes, and see the world from their point of view. And those are the four major changes that have really fundamentally changed the landscape and therefore the requirements of leadership. So what it means to be a leader today is a fundamentally different thing than it was when Machiavelli was around or even when Winston Churchill was around. So now, what does that mean? I want to show you a model here. And what we could say is that Machiavelli was really operating from a model of a pyramid, which I would call the pyramid of power. Okay? So he would say that as a leader, you have to have a vision. Okay? You have to have a vision. You have to believe in a future that inspires you and that you then mobilize people for. You then have to have a strategy. You have to understand the how. How am I going to get to the results? Which is basically the bridge between vision and this top level here, which is you have to take decisive actions. So far, so good. I think any leader that you know has had those characteristics or those kinds of stepping stones to producing results. However, what Machiavelli completely ignored was these lowest levels of the pyramid, which in my view are the foundational stepping stones that without which your leadership will go in the wrong direction, or it will be built on sand, or it will be so tiny that you can't really make anything happen. Number one, you need to be self-aware. You need to be somebody who actually knows yourself, knows your secret blind spots, knows your culture, knows your motives, knows your values. And unless you know that and you're firmly grounded in this kind of ethical foundation, you will do some very, very bad things. And we've seen that with Enron, we've seen it with Hitler, we've seen it with Napoleon. Those are some of the examples of what happens when leaders do not have a strong foundation of self-awareness. What's the second layer that is also ignored by Machiavelli? It's the ability to build relationships. And when I say relationships, I mean not just a hierarchical relationship where I tell you what to do or you tell me what to do, which I would call asymmetrical power, but a relationship that is based on trust, on shared values, on shared interests, where